Today I'm going to be turning this ammo can into this solar powered laptop, tablet, cell phone, DC electronics charger. Okay, so to build this system, there's a few things you're definitely going to have, like a battery and a container. There's a couple of things that are optional, like a battery monitor, and a couple of other things like shrink wrap, tubing, things like that to just make it a little bit nicer. But the absolute minimum, you're going to need a battery. For this, I wanted it to be really portable. So I went with a 30 amp hour battery and a 50 caliber ammo box. And you can see this, they're pretty small. This is really not that big. Very, very portable. You could easily take this camping or fishing or something like that. And that is definitely what was my goal with this, is to keep it small and portable. But 30 amp hour is, 384 watt hours, which is to charge a laptop. You can keep a laptop charged up pretty much all day, unless you're playing first person shooters or something like that all day. But for the most part, this is very adequate for charging laptops, tablets, cell phones, no problem at all. You're going to need a solar charge controller. This is just a cheap PWM charge controller. It works perfect, no problem. I think it was like $20 on Amazon. Most of this stuff I got on Amazon. Tools, you're definitely going to need a nice crimping tool. You're going to need assorted crimp connectors, spade connectors, and fork connectors, that kind of thing. You're going to need appropriate cable. So wiring, this battery will put out 30 amps maximum. So I went with 12 gauge wire that was rated for 30 amps. You're going to need some assorted DC connectors, really whatever you want. These are just the dinosaur style USB type A connectors. This is a 65 watt USB-C connector with a fast charge 18 watt USB-A connector for like Samsung phones and stuff like that. And the nice thing about this is this will charge a laptop. The USB-C is adequate to charge a laptop by itself. And it also has an on-off switch built in, which is very nice. But for anything that requires more than that, more than 65 watts, which some laptops do, I'm going to use this, which is, just your standard 12 volt socket, I think 10 amps or whatnot. I'm going to use this in conjunction with this because I couldn't find, and if you guys know of one, please post in the comments and let me know. I could not find a 100 watt version of this. I think 65 watts was the most I could find for power delivery. So, but these you can find all over the place, and this is 100 watts if I could get it to focus. This is USB-C delivery, 100 watts. And this will charge a laptop, a MacBook Pro, a higher end laptop that requires a little bit more juice. It does it really well. And I just plug this into the other socket and it works great. And you could use this for all kinds of other things too. There's a ton of accessories, obviously. You guys are probably well aware that you could use this for. Okay, the other thing you're gonna need is a DC fuse block and the appropriate size fuses. So whatever your DC socket requires, some of them are 10 amp, some of them are 30 amp. I'm going to be connecting, all these I got off of Amazon, and I will put links in all of this in the description. These two I'm actually going to run together. It comes with a branch cable with a 30 amp fuse, but I'm going to actually run that because there's no on-off switch with these. I'm going to run that through this switch. This is a 4-pole DC switch, which will handle up to 40 amps, which is more than enough. And I'll put links to all this in the description in case you want to build the same thing or close to it. But I'm going to also use this, and I would highly recommend getting a DC fuse block with the appropriate size fuse. This just makes it so much nicer. It's got an easier to run instead of connecting everything directly to the battery, which is really not a great idea, especially when you've got multiple DC devices. This makes it easy because it has the negative bus bar, and you can just, you know, connect all your negative connections, and your positive connections go down the other side. And then you just put whatever size fuse you want for the individual pieces, the individual DC components. As far as components goes, I think that's about it. I'm going to use an XT60 connector for the charge input, the solar charge input. You could use whatever connector you want, MC4 or, you know, whatever you prefer if you've got something laying around. I bought this off Amazon and I just cut the other end off. I cut the male end off, and then I just, you know, created my own connectors to connect to the DC charge, DC fuse block. Tools, you're going to need some pliers. You're going to need some assorted screwdrivers, flathead, just to kind of pry things off and put things on. You're going to need a Phillips head screwdriver. You're going to need some type of drill or screw gun with some step bits or a step bit. I think all I really needed was this particular one. I will also put the link to this step bit in the description. And this is, you know, obviously to make the holes for these connectors in the top. For the square holes, I just used a box cutter. You know, this is fairly soft plastic, and so if you have a fresh blade on one of these, you could use an X-Acto knife, a box cutter, as long as you go slow and are very careful. Probably an X-Acto knife might work better. I just used, you know, a box cutter, and it worked fine. You just gotta kind of go slow with it. Trace out your the size that you need for I did that for the square hole for the switch and the square holes for the battery monitor. This is optional, really. I guess you don't really need this. It's good to see what your charge is for the wattage coming in, amperage, that kind of thing. But if all you're worried about is just to see kind of the rough state of charge of the battery, this does give you that. It's not super accurate. There's only like 4 bars. So I wanted something a little bit more. But if you just wanted to go really simple and easy, you could probably skip on this. But I'm going to go ahead and install this. I have a separate video on configuring this battery monitor and whatnot. If you're interested in that, you can look that up. But yeah, I also have a heat gun to do some of the custom wiring. That's just kind of a bonus, just to make the crimp connectors a little more sturdy on the end. Like for instance, here, I like to put a little bit of shrink wrap tubing on there, just to make it a little sturdy, and it works really well. That's kind of optional as well. And of course, I have shrink wrap tubing from Harbor Freight. And really, that's it. I'm gonna go ahead and start building it, and I'll do it step by step. Okay, I'll be right back. One thing I did want to mention about this that you do not need, which is nice, is there's no inverter involved with this at all. So, which inverters are expensive, right? So there's no AC. This is all just DC electronics. So you don't have to have a inverter at all on this. If you wanted to, you absolutely could get like one of those car inverters that just has the 12 volt cigarette lighter connection. And this will do, like 300 watts. You could get one of those if you really wanted to. But for my purpose, I wanted to go simple, light, portable, just for camping, fishing, that kind of thing. No inverter required, so you get to skip that part if you want to, and no wiring for all of that either. Okay, just wanted to mention that. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is just trace my cuts, right, before I make any cuts. So this is how this piece comes, and you can see it comes with like this branch connector, and there's a 30 amp blade style fuse built in, which is nice. I'm actually going to keep any of these pieces, both of these pieces came with an inline fuse. This has a 10 amp inline fuse. I'm actually going to keep the inline fuses in place. I'm not going to mess with the cabling that it came with really, other than just to make the custom connectors. I'm going to leave that and run that into the fuse block so it's double fused. I didn't seem to have any problems running it like that. There's nothing that I'm aware of, that no issues that will cause. If you guys know of some issue that having two fuses might cause, let me know, but there doesn't seem to be any real problem with that. So I'm just going to leave the inline fuse with the cables and run that into the DC fuse block, mostly just to keep the cables uniform, so that the only thing that's connected to the battery directly is going to be this with the positive and negative connector. And also just to make it like, if I do need to replace one of the fuses here, it'll be very easy to get to. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and make the traces. I'm going to trace out my cuts, and then I'm going to go ahead and start drilling my holes and making the cuts for the switch and the DC power connections, DC outlets, and the battery monitor. All right, I'll do that and I'll be right back. Okay, so I got most of my outlines for my cuts ready to go. I just used a chalk pen. That seems to work pretty good for that. I used this as the template. This came with some of these receptacles. I'm not actually going to use this for when I actually mount them. I'm just going to drill holes because they all come with these little washer type bolts that will go on the underside, and that seems to hold these in place really well. So I just don't feel like I need the extra bulk of this. Plus it won't be uniform. All three of them, just only two of them will have this if I used it, but I'm not. So I've got my cuts for my DC outlets. I've got I've got my outline for my DC outlets. Got my outline for my battery monitor. I got my outline for my switch. I got my outline for the screw holes that I'm going to need for this, because that's going to mount like that. And the only other cut that I'm going to need to make is a hole for the XT60 connector. What I'm going to do is drill a hole probably over here or on one of these corners, and this is going to come out, and I'm going to mount that. Now I'll show you how I mount that when everything's said and done. So cool. All right, so now I'm going to actually start making my cuts using my box cutter right here. Put a fresh blade in this. If you're going to do this, I would definitely recommend putting a brand new blade, because it just makes it easier to cut, and just be very, very careful. And so I'm going to start making my cuts with this and my step bit for the DC receptacles. I'll make those cuts and I'll be right back. Okay, one thing that I'm going to have to do for this to work is, so I've got basically my holes drilled for the most part. I'm going to have to kind of tweak the size a little bit. But there's this, I don't know if you can see it very well, but there's sort of this railing that goes through for sort of a reinforcement on the lid, which is great. But we're going to need to take some snips, and I'm going to actually cut this out so that these pieces screw in there very well. So that's just something to keep in mind that you'll have to do. Not a big deal, but it just is what it is. See? Piece of cake. So you want to make sure if you buy these exact ones, this pair that comes together, you want to make sure these two are close together so that that branch cable will reach, obviously. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, those are mounted, and those little washer things, I just hand tighten them, but they actually hold really well. You could probably get a pair of pliers, but I'm a little nervous to over tighten them because it is plastic, but man, they feel really solid. I'll probably adjust them a little bit just so that they're more lined up and, you know, with one another, but yeah, those are mounted. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and drill my holes and mount the solar charge controller next. Okay, for the screw holes to mount the solar charge controller, I'm gonna use this smaller step bit just to make, you know, just the holes just big enough for these mounting screws, and I've got the matching washer and nuts. So you can, you know, just go to Home Depot and find screws that will fit this. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and make the holes. What I'm gonna end up doing to run the cables for all of this is make a hole underneath and use one of these rubber grommets for just to kind of make it nice, kind of polish it a little bit. But you'll see when I'm done how the cables will run from the bottom here inside with that. So, I mean, it's not gonna be waterproof or anything like that, but it'll still be pretty, it'll still look pretty nice. Okay, so you can see that is mounted on there quite well. I think what I'm going to do is I just kind of hand tighten them a little bit with a screwdriver, holding the nut there, and it seems to hold really well. I'm not going to torque that down with a wrench because it is plastic after all, and I'm just kind of worried that I might tighten it too much and crack something. So, but that is very secure. That isn't going anywhere. And just to keep this from shorting something out or something, which is unlikely, I'm just gonna kind of wrap this with electrical tape so that there's a barrier there. But yeah, okay, so that's mounted, and so are the DC outputs. The next thing I need to do, which is probably one of the trickiest parts of this whole thing, and it's still not that bad, I need to cut this small square out for the switch. And the switch is going to control the on-off for these two. This has its own on-off switch, so I'm just going to run this straight to the DC fuse block because this says, you know, it has its own on-off. There'll be no drain, no potential for any drain on the battery. These, on the other hand, don't come with a switch, like I said, so I'm going to just kind of wire my own in. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start cutting this one out, and this part is the most tricky, so I'm going to have to go kind of slow on this and kind of make mid-course corrections. I'm going to start small and kind of open it up as I go, just to make sure I don't overcut it. For this cut, if you're not 100% perfect, like obviously I wasn't, but there's a bit of a border around that it'll kind of cover up, you know, like a less than perfect cut. So as you can see, there's no overcut. You can't see into the box or anything like that. So good enough for me. And they have tabs that kind of lock it into place on the side. And again, I will leave links to these switches in the description. So if you wanted to use the same exact ones, you could. So. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is make my cut for the battery monitor. Okay, I got the battery monitor in place. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mount the DC fuse block, and I'm actually going to screw that into, there's sort of a denser piece of plastic up here just where the lid meets. And I'm going to just use some self-tapping screws and screw this into the side just above the charge controller. And that should allow it to be fairly easy to get to, easy enough to get to when I install things. And if not, I could always unscrew it and you know, mount what I need to mount to this and then screw it back in. But I should have enough room after everything's said and done to not have to do that, hopefully, fingers crossed. And for the battery cables, again, I'm using 12 gauge wire that was rated for 30 amps. So, and that's for the battery. And this is going to go directly to the positive side of the battery. This is going to go directly to the negative side of the battery. And so that is the only thing that will connect directly to the battery. Okay, I'm going to mount this and I'll be right back. Okay, so got my DC fuse block mounted in. It's in there. It isn't going anywhere. And I just need to make sure that the lid would shut. And it does. No issues there. So we're good to go. Next, I need to make a hole for the cables for this that go to the battery and to the solar charge input, which is going to be that XT60 cable that I showed you. So I just need to make a hole big enough for those 4 cables to fit through. Okay, so there's the hole with the grommet. Okay, so now I'm making the hole for the XT60 connector to run through. So I'm gonna route that. This is gonna come out here, and I'm on the other side of the on-off switch, and I'm going to run the cables through the inside and then out here to the controller. I'm just making the hole for that up here now. I'm going to use one of these with a zip tie just to hold that down. That seems to work pretty well. So, but again, you could use whatever style solar input that you want, MC4 or any, whatever you like. That seems to hold pretty well. If not, I could always, change the mechanism that holds that down. But I've used these in the past, and as far as these little plastic zip tie holders, they actually hold pretty well when they're sticking to plastic. So definitely feels like it's on there really nice and solid. Now I just need to run the cables out to the charge controller. And the trick is to make sure you have enough cable so that you can open and close the lid when you need to. Obviously, you're not going to be opening the lid all the time unless something breaks or you want to make a change or something. But what I'm trying to do is keep the cables just long enough to do what they need to do, open and close the lid and get to where they need to go without being too long where it's a cable management nightmare. Okay, that feels pretty solid. Next, I think I'm gonna run the cables that will go from the charger to the battery. Okay, so I've got my charge controller secured and I've got my cables connected very securely. The next thing I'm gonna do is start the wiring for the DC components. This I'm not going to wire into the on-off switch because again that has its own on-off switch. And for anyone who's wondering about the wiring schematic for the switch, this is it. Very straightforward. Okay, so I've got my DC components, all my sockets wired up. I'm trying to kind of cable management as I go. I'm trying to cable manage as I go. So I've got these two connected to the switch right here. Now I've got everything wired. I just need to connect it to the DC fuse block with the appropriate fuse connected. I am also going to fuse the battery monitor as well. I have a 1 amp fuse on the that I'm going to connect to the positive side. I don't know if you guys can see that. Okay, this black 1 amp fuse is going to be for the positive connection on the battery monitor, just to be extra safe. So everything will have a fuse. Nothing will not have a fused connection. Cool. Okay, let me start wiring everything into the fuse block, and I'll be right back once that's done. Okay, so I've got my switch wired in. I've got my DC components all connected. I tried to do a little bit of cable management. I'm not the best at that, but at any rate. And I've got everything wired into the fuse block as well. The next thing I'm going to do is secure the battery into place. And to do that, for now, I might go back and get like a metal bracket to do that later on. But I've had pretty good luck with this stuff. I'm going to put this on the bottom of the battery, and this is like heavy duty Dura Lock. It's not like a Velcro, but it is like a hook and loop type system, but it's very heavy duty. And I'm going to secure the battery into the bottom of the ammo can container with this stuff. And then once everything is said and done, I'm going to put some foam blocks in there as well, just to keep things from moving around so that it's fairly secure inside. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get that set up, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I think that Dura Lock, I think I'm going to use that just temporarily to keep it secured, but if you can see that stuff is like really heavy duty. It really holds that in there pretty good. I think eventually what I'm going to do is get some metal brackets and maybe bolt it into the side and something to secure it. But for now, that is very, very secure. And I'm not going to obviously be throwing this thing around or anything like that. But for now, that should be definitely good enough. Okay, so I think the next step is to get the battery hooked up to the fuse block and make sure that everything works. So I'll do that and I'll be right back. Okay, I've got my battery cabled in, secured with the Dura Lock. I've got all the cabling completed. Everything is connected and should be working. Let's go ahead and give it a test. The lid shuts. That's good. I've got my switch installed here. Power's on. You can see that the light comes on there. Let's go ahead and hook some devices up to this. Okay, so I've got a bunch of devices connected to this, laptop, iPad. I got 2 sets of headphones all connected up to this charging station. We're gonna fire it up. See the iPad's charging. See the charging lights for my headphones. Laptop's connected and charging. Pulling 113 watts at 9 amps currently. Very cool. Seems to be working great. Okay, so I got my 200 watt panel, 210 watt panel set up, connected to the charging station, getting 130 watts coming in. Not too bad. This is definitely charging. That rate, it shouldn't take too long to charge up fully. And when the sun gets in the right spot, I usually get a little bit better than that. But yeah, so this is a really fun project. I look forward to using this to charge up all my devices and whatnot and on the go. So I hope that this helps. I hope I covered everything okay. If you guys have any questions, just let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to answer, or if I missed anything or any of that stuff. But yeah, this is really cool, fun little project. Okay, I hope this helps. Take care, guys.